Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of Nowhere. Well, we've got a very interesting guest on my show today. His name is Jeremiah Osman. He's from Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. In 1991, he witnessed two Bigfoot creatures. It inspired him about this interest in the activity. Um, and he's tonight we're going to talk about a little bit about Bigfoot and then about Bradshaw Ranch. I know Jeremy has been there quite a few times, so he's been investigating that area for quite a while. He's been on the History Channel. He's been on lots of different podcasts as well, been on Coast to Coast as well. So please welcome Jeremiah to the show. Hello there.
Hello there. Thank you for having me, Bob. It's nice to meet you, and thank you, everybody, for listening.
That's okay. Tell us a bit about the Bigfoot story, what you saw.
Absolutely. I was 13 years old, and I was living outside of a small town in kind of rural, semi-rural Pennsylvania, just south of Pittsburgh, my hometown of Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. And we had to leave our farm and move to my grandmother's house, which was on a semi-populated road called West McMurray Road on the east side of Canonsburg. And my grandmother had a heart attack and refused to move to our farm. So to take care of her, we left our farm and moved into that house. And after she passed away in the early 1990s, we started to notice a lot of strange sounds at night outside of that house. My mother at the time had her bedroom on the bottom part of the home, on the ground level of the home. It was a pretty big home. And her bedroom was an old atrium. So 3 sides of the room sticking out the side of the house were all windows. And the only street light that was in the area actually cast light at her through the 2 sides of the house, 2 sides of that portion of her bedroom. And at night, something was running past those windows, which she had covered with blinds, and she would see a silhouette. And the dogs that we had were going absolutely crazy, barking at the windows, and their fur was standing up. And so naturally, she thought there was a prowler. It was something tall and running through the yard. The dogs were upset. And so she warned my twin brother at the time and myself. We were only, I think, 13 years old. She said, "Boys, don't go outside at night. Make sure the doors are locked, make sure your windows are locked. It looks like we have a prowler." And she in turn actually called our cousin, who was chief of police in the area, and let him know that she believed there was a prowler. And in the obligatory sense, he said, "Sure, we'll put more patrols out in that area." But he was surprised because there was not that much crime back then in that area. And I went to my chiropractor, which is about every 2 weeks, and there was a copy of the Pittsburgh magazine sitting on the table. And while I was waiting for my chiropractor, I picked it up, and there was a very interesting article on a paranormal research society called the Pennsylvania Association for the Study of the Unexplained, or PASU as they call it.
Yeah.
And it was Stan Gordon's organization, which was originally organized to study the Kecksburg, Pennsylvania UFO crash. And in that article, it described a lot of the things that the PASU group was investigating in southwestern Pennsylvania. And I was shocked when I was reading that they had a large number of Bigfoot sightings in Washington, Fayette, and Greene County of southwestern Pennsylvania at that time. I was living in Washington County. My chiropractor was in Allegheny County, closer to Pittsburgh. And the article, as I was reading it, ended with descriptions of the subtle things that people can notice, take notice of if Bigfoot were in their area. And the sounds that my mother had described of a few of the times that this shadow had run past her windows at night were described in the article. And I remember specifically, she said that she was wondering what kind of drug abusing prowler this could be, because when they would run by the house, they were making baby sounds and gurgling noises and growling sounds. So she thought it was also something that was very drug abused. But those very sounds that she described in the exact same way that she described were actually in that article about PASU. So when I read them, I took the article home. It had a 1-800 number saying, if you're experiencing these things, please call us. And again, at the age of 13, I should have consulted with my mother first, but I didn't. I called the number and I talked to one of the lead investigators at the time, and they asked for our address and so on. And they said, when can we come out and see the place? And I said, well, you can come out on the weekends because I'm free on the weekends. And so they came, and I met two of their investigators, their chief field investigator, which is a man named John Stasko, and his assistant, a man named Devin Ross. And they immediately wanted to know where we were seeing these things. And I said, no, I haven't seen anything. My mother's seeing these silhouettes on the side of the house. So naturally, I called her out, and she's kind of surprised that she's talking now to investigators about a possible Bigfoot occurrence on the property. But she told them honestly what she saw, or what she had seen up against the windows, which was just a silhouette, and how the dogs were reacting. And they said, do you mind if we take a look at the property? She said, of course not. Go right ahead. And within, I think, less than 20 minutes of being on the property, they found a set of very large and very deep tracks. We were living on 5 acres of property at the time. On the bottom of the property was a huge garden, which was freshly tilled at that time. And then there was a tree line behind that. And then the second oldest railroad in the United States, which is the Chartiers Valley Railroad, goes through a gorge behind that home. And so they called us to come down to the bottom of the property, and they were pointing out the footprints. And I remember having almost like heart palpitations as a 13-year-old. I was frightened that something like that was coming through the yard, because naturally when you're little and you're afraid to go to sleep, what do the people's parents tell them? Don't worry, monsters don't exist. Don't worry, UFOs don't exist. It's one of those sweet white lies that parents would tell their kids so that they don't get frightened about going to sleep. And here I'm seeing these footprints and realizing there is indeed monsters in southwestern Pennsylvania. And I always thought that if there is a Bigfoot, it's in the Pacific Northwest, and only in the Pacific Northwest. At that time, that's what I thought. And they asked us if it was convenient if they would come over and do what they called stakeouts. And they explained that what they would do is to come over, and they would spend literally the entire night in observation posts on certain places on the property to watch it. Yeah. And I was really impressed with the professionalism of these guys and how keen they had come to position themselves that they were, for instance, downwind. So that these creatures, which they were very aware would have very keen sense of smell, would not necessarily smell them on the property and be diverted away just from the sense of smell. So they came out for a period of weekends, and by September, it became, I remember the date specifically, September 21st of 1991. I remember they came with a night vision set, and they had these voice activated headsets where they had radios on, and they had a boom, which had the microphone. Common technology now, but back then in the early 1990s, it was pretty high tech. And they said, the only thing we need from you this time was, would you be a guide? And we understand if you don't want to, because if you're frightened, but we do need you to listen to instructions. I said, sure, I guess I can do that, but what do you mean by instructions? And they said, you'll stay quiet, don't speak, don't say anything unless we tell you to, and don't turn on the flashlight. And I said, yeah, I can do that. So basically, to keep this particular story a little bit shorter, they wanted the secondary investigator, this big man named Devin Ross, to take me onto the Chartiers Valley Railroad, which was covered by an interlocking canopy of trees. And it was in a deep gorge. And even though it was a full moon that night, it was very, very dark down there. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And they were expecting us to walk down there with no light, which we managed. We had gone back and forth several times in the designated area, approximately a mile. And I remember my ears back then were good enough that I could hear the lead investigator as we were moving back and forth on the railroad, calling the investigator I was with, saying there are two very large figures in the tree line. And he said, where are you now? And he asked me, where are we? And I was so familiar with the area. I looked up, I said, we're just behind the next door neighbor's property. Our property is about 25 yards ahead. And he said, okay, let's start moving. Don't turn on your flashlight, stay quiet. And as we're moving forward, we heard a ripping sound that I don't even know how to describe it, but it was a ripping sound that you'd only hear if a machine was pulling a tree trunk out of the ground. It was very loud. Oh, yeah. And we heard a crash. And I remember even seeing sparks in front of us because something had hit the iron rails of the railroad. And the lead investigator at that point put his hand on me, said, stay calm, don't turn on your light. And then we heard it again. We heard a ripping sound and another crash in front of us, this time no sparks. And he asked permission from the lead investigator. He said, there's something happening. Can I turn on my lights? And he said, if you're absolutely sure you have to, go ahead and do it. So he turned on his flashlight, asked me not to turn on mine. and in front of us was a huge cloud of gray dust and big chunks of rock. So there was something ripping out rocks from the side of the gorge and throwing the rocks down at us. And after we were very clear of what was happening, he turned off his light again. He said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm kind of scared." And he said, "I'm right with you. Just stay calm." And he put his hand on my shoulder, which was reassuring. And then more boulders came down closer to us. And even though I don't remember shouting out loud, they told me that the other people that had headsets could hear me shouting and screaming out of fear. I have no recollection of being that scared, but I'm not surprised. I was only 13 years old. The boulders came very close. And again, they were shadowing a few more through sparks. And then it stopped. And there was a peaceful quiet that was almost too quiet. And then there was an electrical tension in the air. And actually, that same electrical tension I felt once in the UK, in the village of Fakenham when we were there. There was a heavy fog. There's very few times I felt this type of tension, which I assume comes with a lot of paranormal activity.
Yeah.
But there was a palatable, thick cloud of tension that I could feel at that time. And the silence as we were listening to it was broken by another call on the headset. And they said, "We can see the two figures now. They're coming up through the tree line from where you are. We're going to try to get closer to them. Stay where you are." So we stayed quiet, and I was expecting to hear a rushing sound or something running through the forest above us, but I heard nothing. They called back and told us that the figures had disappeared, and they said, "Why don't you reconnoiter to the east and the west and let us know if you see anything?" So we did that, and I was finally starting to calm down, and we reported back that we didn't see anything and nothing was moving. And they said, "Well, we don't see anything up here either. Why don't you come back up?" And they said, "But come back up through the rear of your neighbor's properties. Don't come back up on your property." And so this second man, Devin, asked me, where do we go? So I showed him a path which could go through the forest and up into about approximately 7 properties down from my grandmother's property. And now I felt really relieved because we were now out in the open. I could see homes. I could see our property in the distance, and I could see, even in the moonlight, the investigators in the backyard. And I could see they had their flashlights on. They were shining their flashlights at the ground, presumably looking for footprints. And that was when the tension finally went away from me. And as we were walking toward the back of our property, these two creatures leapt suddenly from our right, which was in the tree line above the railroad tracks, right in front of us, just yards away. Oh. And they were running. There was 2 of them. They were running from right to left toward a pine tree in my neighbor's yard. And I just remember feeling like I almost felt like I was going to pass out because the terror was such. But most specifically, I remember they weren't looking at us. They had their shoulders turned like so, because it didn't appear that they had a neck. The heads appeared to be just sitting on the shoulders. And they had their shoulders turned like so to look away from us, looking at the other investigators. And they were kind of making a bobbing motion, kind of like a pigeon bobs as they ran. And it was you could tell that these were not human. They were tall and thin. You usually hear about people seeing very robust and strong-looking, powerful-looking ones. These ones were very lanky, and they later deduced that when they did a measurement, they had Devin and myself stand at roughly where we were, and they were putting a yardstick up to guesstimate how tall they were, and they came up with that they were about 9 feet tall, and that they were probably juvenile, which is why they were thinner. But what I saw at that time, the 2 of them with their heads or their shoulders turned away, looking at the other investigators. This man, Devin, grabbed my shoulder and said, "Turn on your light." And so I turned on the light, and the lights hit them. And you could see very long, shaggy fur hanging from the arms as they were running. They were swaying their arms. And the one behind the first one perceived the light and turned and looked at us like that. And I saw 2 big, round, green eyes looking back at us. And it must have been startled, and it ran faster. And it bumped into the one in front of it. And that one in turn turned and looked at us. And they both started running faster. And the most bizarre part of that night was the next thing that happened. And mind you, this happened in just a matter of seconds. But as they were running from my right to left, they faded out and disappeared like ghosts right before a pine tree in my neighbor's yard. And I didn't know it until that time, but the investigators told me later that night, amid our banter and talk about it, that they had other witnesses who had seen these creatures walk into embankments as if they weren't physical. They looked completely physical, but could walk into an embankment and even walk into cliff sides in Pennsylvania. And so I learned a lot in one night. But the thing I remember most of all that night is I was too afraid to go to sleep. And I think it was a couple days before I was actually able to sleep because the fear was such. But they told me, they said, if it's any consolation to you, they said in most cases, these things are quite harmless. They run the other way. They don't want human contact. And that's why we're very lucky to have seen them. And I remember Devin leaned down, because I wasn't very tall at the age of 13. He put his hand on my shoulder again. He said, I want you to know, and I don't remember the exact statistic, but he said, for someone your age to see something like this, the odds are 1 in, and he gave an incredible figure. He said, you should feel really good about that. And my brother, who didn't volunteer to go down that night, was very upset that he had missed it, and jealous that I had gone out and seen this. And so for a long time, he was kind of holding me a grudge because of that. But those gentlemen came back numerous times after that, because one of the two, the lead investigator, had his own sighting prior to that, not a very good one. And Devin, the secondary investigator, that was his first time to witness a Bigfoot creature. And they also told me, they said, at the age of 13, you're lucky that we were here with you to see it, because if you had seen it without us and told somebody, nobody would believe you. But because we're part of a professional investigative organization, this is going on the record for the rest of your life. And so they're trying to, I guess, make me feel even better about what we'd seen. But I remember fear more than excitement, I think, was the overriding emotion at that time. But after that, like anything anomalous, I think most people would feel the same. The fear goes away, and then you want to see it again. And that was what inspired myself to become an investigator over time, because I wanted to see something like that again. I wanted to see more anomalous activity. And I left Pennsylvania in 1999. So that sighting was in 1991. And those investigators came back over, I think, a period of 2 years, roughly, just shy of 2 years. And they did actually have several more encounters with these creatures. And they also got fur on a property adjacent to ours, which was a Black Angus farm.
Right.
And they found a tuft of fur on a barbed wire fence that had been very forcibly pushed down. And I remember walking up behind them, and they turned around and they had their hands up. They said, stop, don't move. Don't come near us just yet. Stay there. And so I was, again, kind of frightened as to why they were being so terse with me. And I could see that they were pulling out gloves. They had these portable science kits, if you will, and they were putting these special gloves on so they wouldn't contaminate it. And they were pulling this long black fur off of the wire. And they asked me what kind of livestock is in here. And I said, it's beef stock. It's Black Angus. And they rolled their eyes like, oh, this is probably a tail, the tail from the bovine. And I said, well, I actually grew up on a farm with Holstein, and the tail, the hair of the cows doesn't look like that. And so as a 13-year-old, I was able to tell them that much.
Oh, brilliant.
Said, I'm sorry.
That's brilliant. You said that.
I just looking at it, I recognized right away it was something else. And they said, well, we're going to send it away to be tested. At the time, the best place to test it, that would cost these organizations quite a bit of money, was the main FBI lab, which I believe was in Maryland at the time, either Maryland or Virginia. And they sent the hairs to the FBI lab. And what they came back with, it was no known species native to Pennsylvania, no known species to North America. They couldn't actually name what species, what DNA that was from. And I still have one of the hairs, because I complained. I was like, you guys found that tuft of hairs and I can't have one. And they returned a couple weeks after that, and they had one in a little piece of plastic.
Oh.
So
and you still got it?
I've still got it. I haven't looked at it for a while, but I've still got it, and it's sealed up in a box. And that was the one encounter in my youth that really changed my life. To see something like that, and I've since met other people who have seen either Bigfoot or other anomalous activity, and there seems to be a general consensus where the fear after seeing something like that gets past you, and then suddenly you're inspired to want to see more. A lot of the people who have become experiencers end up being regular investigators, and some of them go all the way to conducting themselves professionally. A lot of them end up conducting themselves just as watchers with low tech, maybe a camera, a flashlight. In some cases, their cell phone. Alexander and I don't have a cell phone. We're very anti-cell phone people. So we go out, we've got an old-fashioned digital camera and our flashlights, and that's about it. But since then, we've had a lot of incredible encounters, and especially here in Arizona. At the time when I moved here in 1999, the famous Bradshaw Ranch had just been swept out from under the Bradshaw family in a very complicated financial, what would you call it, deal, if you will, along with 4 other ranches in addition to the Bradshaw Ranch. So at that time, the rumor was that the government took the property because of the anomalous activity. Now, when I interviewed John Bradshaw twice, he's a very nice man. He's very fun to talk to, and he and his family experienced a great deal of activity on the property. It's about 75 acres, a little more than 75 acres. Actually, it's closer to 90 acres of property when Bob actually bought it. His father, Bob Bradshaw, lived literally for a time in all 50 states. He traveled all around and was looking for a place that he could call home. Interesting man. He was born in China. He used to brag that he was the only man that could sing the Star Spangled Banner in Mandarin. He was a very interesting man. He was a professional photographer. He was a carpenter, and he came back to Sedona in 1940 and bought a home near what's called Chapel Road now, near the chapel in Sedona, which is off of 179. It's in a relatively populated area of the town. But he wanted more than that. He wanted a rural piece of land that he could call his own where he could have livestock. So in 1960, he bought a decent sized 90-acre parcel of property in front of a place called Loy Canyon and Hartwell Canyon from one of the original pioneer families in the area, which was the Hancock family. And that 90 acres had one old-fashioned southwestern adobe with the adobe bricks that you can actually see the grass sticking out of. It's a beautiful, and it's abandoned now. It's a beautiful structure. And he built his home right beside it. And he also constructed, now this is in 1960 when he built his ranch house there. He also built, by 1972, he finished constructing his own movie set, which is a 3-dimensional movie town, or an old west town, that he named Bitter Creek. And quite a few full-length features were shot on that property, as well as TV shows, TV commercials. And when the government bought the property, one of their first goals was to burn that set down, which they did very quickly, because they didn't want more people coming to the property because of its film history and fame. And their secondary motives, of course, were to keep people from coming down there to see the anomalous properties of the place while they were investigating it themselves. At that time, when they took the property from the Bradshaw family, John Bradshaw explained to me, all I can say about it is that we had to sign some papers, and I assume he meant non-disclosure agreement. And he said with a smile, I can't explain it. I'm not supposed to, and it's complicated. And he kind of nodded his head when he stressed saying that was complicated. So I understood then that more or less confirms that he cannot talk about the government deal with him and taking the property. And I assume it was much like the other 4 properties that were taken, where they were basically told that eminent domain would be used by the government to seize the property, and they would receive no money at all and be moved off the property, or they could take a certain sum of money, which was probably more than the property would be worth, sign a non-disclosure agreement that they wouldn't talk about what was going on there or who bought it, and then move off the property. And so I assume he's keeping up his side of the contract. Again, he's a very nice man. He's fun to talk to. I've interviewed him twice now, and he's always a great deal of fun to talk to. But 13 years ago, as of this past August, Alexander and I both read a well-known local investigator's book, a man named Tom Dongo. And he wrote a book called Merging Dimensions. And to date, it's the first book. There's been several others, but it's the first book written about the anomalous activity on the Bradshaw Ranch. It only came about because Linda Bradshaw, which is Bob Bradshaw's wife, was a very, very spiritual, open-hearted, and interesting lady. When Bob Bradshaw was done with his feeding of his livestock and caring for his horses, and sundown came, he liked to go inside and sit down and relax and watch TV. She, on the other hand, liked to be outside. She explained that she enjoyed the smell of the desert at night, the sounds of the desert at night. And she would stand outside with a camera. And, at the time, it was before the digital cameras, the early 1990s. She had a 800 speed film in her camera, and she would keep that around her neck. And they had 5 ranch dogs that were always at her side. And she used to like to watch for shooting stars and the sky in this part of Arizona is very, very clear, and you can see the Milky Way very well. And one night, she explains this in the first part of Tom Dongo's books, because she co-wrote it with him. She wrote, I think, the first 60 to 80 pages, and then Tom followed up with his half and take on the property and the follow-up of the book. And she wrote that one night, the dogs were upset, and she stood to look at the sky, and she saw a large 8-foot diameter red orb fly right over her. And she decided, well, I've got my camera, I'm gonna follow it. So she threw the camera on the seat of her truck and raced up her lane. The whole lane leading in from the forest road is a very rough, rocky road that's about 1.1 miles from the forest road, which is also very rough and requires high clearance vehicles to reach it. About 1/3 of the way into the property is a very high hill that they call the Bradshaw Knoll. And up on that hill, she swerved to a stop, grabbed her camera, and jumped outside the truck just to see it flying ahead of her, north of her, into a canyon that kind of curves to the left in front of her in this beautiful panoramic view. And so she starts clicking photographs of it. And it goes into the canyon, lights up the canyon walls, and then shoots straight up into the air until she can't see it anymore. And so she's feeling really good about what she saw. She doesn't know what she saw, but she's really happy that she got to photograph something so beautiful and anomalous. And she's taking it more or less as a spiritual occurrence. And suddenly she gets this feeling that there's someone behind her. And so she's still holding her camera, and she turns to look behind her, and there's a tree, which is still there to this day on the knoll. And kind of ducking behind that tree when she sees it is another orb, approximately also 8 feet in diameter. And this one's white, it's not red. And she could see something swirling in the center. It had like what she described as an organic nucleus, if you will, of something swirling and moving, energetic. And as it ducked, she kind of felt sorry for it. And so she spoke out loud. She said, honey, you don't have to be afraid of me. I won't hurt you. And she started raising her camera. And she said at that point, she heard a telepathic voice tell her to please not take its photograph. And so she lowered the camera because she was stunned. Where did this voice come from? After she was thinking of, wow, I just heard a voice in my mind. Where did that come from? It flew up and over the tree, over her head, over her truck, and then retraced the path of the former red orb into this canyon, curving to the left. It lit up the walls of the canyon, and then it too shot straight up in the air. So after we read this book, Alexander and I both had read it. I said, well, we need to go see this place because it's so close by. What a remarkable number of things to happen on one location, and it's right down the road. So from the West Sedona, the populated part of town, it's about 12 miles from here. And most of it's on a dirt road that requires high clearance. When we first started going out there, we had a small Honda Civic. So I would sometimes walk in front of the car to remove rock debris from the road so we could actually get down the road and get up the lane. But we were going out there once a week, sometimes twice a week. And we continued that because of having our own repeated encounters on the property for the 13 years. This past August marks our 13th anniversary of going out there once a week, sometimes twice a week. And we were really lucky. We also contacted Tom Dongo and told him that what we were doing, that we were just non-professionals that wanted to see something anomalous again, and that we were going out there. And if we asked him, do you have suggestions? He said, well, why don't you meet up with me? Buy me lunch. He said, that's the only thing I ask of you. Buy me lunch.
Oh, brilliant.
And so we met with him and had a wonderful lunch with Tom. Tom's an absolute gem of an individual. He's had so much experience.
Yeah.
He's got a really thick New England accent. And he's just an absolute loving person. He's become a good friend over the years. And he gave us very little advice. He said, if you take a digital camera, digital cameras are great now with the type of phenomena. He said, take 2 photographs every time you take a photograph of Bradshaw Ranch. And he said, don't think about it. He said, what Linda and I were doing when we were taking photographs, I think he said they took over 19,000 photographs out there in the time, the 2 or 3 years that they were investigating. But what they would do is they knew the phenomena that was there was telepathic and interdimensional. And the interdimensional beings that were coming through this portal that they discovered on the property are very telepathic and can read your thoughts and your emotions. And they realized that it was also very shy and friendly. So what he suggested, he said, what I tell you now, because you read the book and you understand the way I describe the phenomena, is to not think about taking the photographs most often. He said, just randomly put your camera over your shoulder and take 2 shots. They said, I say 2 shots because if something anomalous shows up in one photograph, you want to see if it's moving and it can give you scale, or you want to see if it's gone in the second photograph. So when we went, we did just that. We were taking 2 photographs in every direction. And one of the nights that we were there, I remember one of the nights that was really stuck out to us. We were sitting on a boulder near the fenced-in part of the property, not too far from where Linda Bradshaw's famous portal photograph was taken. And I had a camera that was turned on. Alexandra had a camera that was turned on. We were sitting back to back so that she could see 120 degrees. I could see the other 120
Oh,
degrees,
yeah.
everything. Yeah. We took our drone that night. We had a really nice Parrot and Alfie drone. And we were there for hours. And we both got a feeling that we were going to see something good that night. And after hours and hours of waiting, nothing happened. And so we finally figured, well, it's just not, we were wrong. It's just not one of those nights where anything's going to happen. So for the first time that night, we're ready to go. We turn off our cameras. We take our cameras off. We put them on the back seat of the car. And we're now driving out. We decide to leave. And on the bottom side of the hill I was telling you about, as you're just coming down into the ranch, is 2 switchbacks, 2 very sharp hairpin turns, and then a floodplain for Lincoln Canyon, which when it's running with water, it can flood that whole plain up. Right. Seldom does, but when there's enough rain, it does. And the lane parallels that wash and then hits those 2 switchbacks, which are above me and to my right when we're driving out. And as we were driving out, I looked up to my right through the trees right above us, and there's a huge bonfire on the lane. And back then, before the ranch was more famous as it's gotten since because of documentaries and such, we almost never ran into any other investigators or any other people on the ranch. It was very, very quiet and peaceful. And I'm wondering who would come down here, who would build a bonfire, let alone a bonfire in the middle of the lane. We have to drive through there. And so I'm thinking, what are we going to do now? We're going to be pinned in here while these people are having a bonfire right on it was huge. It looked like it was 8 feet high. It was a massive flame, red flames. And we got to the hairpin turn, and our car turned around it. And now our headlights are right on the spot where the fire was, and it's gone. And so Alexandra and I both stopped the car and were stunned. I said, okay, hang on a second. You saw the flames too? And she said, yeah, I did. I said, there's no way possible that a big fire like that in seconds could be doused and we wouldn't see steam. We wouldn't see red coals. We said, that was a huge fire. And she said, yeah. And so we rolled down the windows and we opened the door slightly and we're trying to see if we can smell smoke. And there was no smoke detected. There was no red coals. There was no fire on the road. And so right away I'm thinking, okay, Tom spoke in his book of this fireball orb that was very elusive. And he had admitted that he had chased this orb on numerous occasions so he could get a documented photograph of it. And it took him, I think, if I remember him saying correctly, that it was 9 years until he finally spotted it at a distance at one point, and he got his camera up in time to take a photograph of it. And I think that photograph is in color on the back of the Merging Dimensions book. So if anybody picks up that book, his newest edition of the book has that very photograph of this elusive fireball orb. And he describes that it was very mercurial. It could lift off the ground after fooling people that it was a campfire or bonfire, and it would coast above the treetops. And, it make people think that they were seeing something, of course, anomalous, something they couldn't explain. And it would also fool other people into thinking, oh gosh, I better call the hot shots because there's going to be a forest fire and the whole area is going to be in flames here shortly because that's a very big fire and it's moving with the wind. But to this date, nobody has a satisfactory explanation for what it is, other than few people have been able to see it. We only saw it that one time. And when I told Tom that, he nodded with his hand and he said, yeah. He goes, a lot of people see it. They're not quick enough to get their camera up to photograph. He goes, it took me 9 years to catch that thing. And
Can I just ask you a question?
Sure.
Has there been any reports of cryptids or interdimensional beings at Bradshaw Ranch?
Yes. That's a very good question. Since the book came out, not only Linda, who described some of these cryptids that she had encountered on the property, some of them were what she dubbed as invisibles. They would hear what sounded like bipedal creatures or even a human being that was heavy walking toward them, but there was nothing there. They would take photographs and these beings would show up in the photograph, but they couldn't see them with the naked eye. One of the most famous ones is one that they dubbed the Blue Man. They could hear footsteps all around them one night. And Tom was taking photographs in multiple directions, just as he had instructed us to do. And he caught what looks to me, just a few feet away from his camera, what looks like a human being with a very high forehead, blue skin, kind of oddly shaped ears, and a strange hairline. It looks like something out of a 1950s science fiction movie.
Oh
And
yeah.
of this one, the Blue Man. And it got a very good photograph of it, but it wasn't there to be seen with the naked eye. It only showed up in their 800 speed film. The most popular cryptid that's been seen down there by the Bradshaws and by other ranchers in the area was a Bigfoot with white fur that they had seen often enough that they started calling her Big Girl. And Big Girl is probably the most popular of the cryptids that are spotted in the area. And it was first seen by Victor Bradshaw, which is, or Victor Johnson, I should say, which was Linda's son from her first marriage, who was living on the property. And they had separated a pregnant mare from the rest of the horses and put her in a circular paddock on the east side of the property. And one night they could hear her panicking. And Victor put his parka on, it was very cold, and went running across the property to go see what was upsetting her. And as he was running toward the tree line, he had to pass through a tree line to get to where this circular paddock was. This very large creature with white fur pushed the trees aside and stepped through. It was almost right in front of him. And he froze and spun around after getting a good look at it and went to run from it. And as he was running, he thought, wait a second, I need to get a better look at this thing. So he turned around and looked, and he could just see its shoulder blades, its back, as it went back through the trees, and it let go of the trees, and the trees did like a closing motion and wavering. That was strong enough to push these very tall cedars aside. And then when it let go of them and turned back, the cedars were waving like this, and he could see it as it walked away. So he went back into the house, and he told his mother that night, Mom, we have a Bigfoot. And she said, what? And he said, we have a Bigfoot on property, and it's white. It's got white fur. And she was skeptical, but open-minded. And he, in turn, had seen it, I think, one more time. The horses were carrying on, and he went out to check them again and again. This creature was out there. And this time he got a better look at it. And he told his mother, and his mother again said, well, no, I want to see this thing. It's not fair. You've seen it. I want to see it. Well, she was driving home one night, and she was coming down that hill that I was telling you about, and she got to the first hairpin turn. And at the end of that first hairpin turn is a very tall pine tree. And she saw this white furry head looking at her from behind the tree, and it ducked as the headlights went over it. And she stopped the car and was listening, and I guess she could hear it running away through the undergrowth. And she went back to the house, and she told Victor, I just saw it. It was standing there watching me as I drove the truck down the lane. The most remarkable thing about that creature was that it came back specifically because they had a pregnant mare. And when the mare was finally about to give birth, she naturally was laying down on her side, and the creature was coming there at night. It was stroking her belly, and they were pieces of the white fur on her belly. It was comforting her. And after the colt came, it was a perfectly healthy colt. You know, one of the concerns that one of the neighbors expressed, I think it was, that whatever this creature was might harm the colt. But the colt was perfectly healthy and happy when it was born. And the creature returned to see the colt. And they know it had returned because when it left footprints outside the paddock, and they found that within a few weeks of it returning to see the colt, that it too had given birth because it was leaving, there were small tracks that were not human, but looked like Bigfoot tracks with a dorsal ridge through the center along the side of the mother Bigfoot's footprints as well. And it dawned on Linda at the time, she must have been very curious about pregnancy. And so she was seeing my mare and comforting my mare because she was in the same condition and had a little one later. But when I think it was Tom, when he was investigating, he naturally wanted to know if anybody else was seeing this thing. And so he went knocking on doors. He went to some of the ranches that were within, I think the closest ranch is within 2 miles of the Bradshaw Ranch.
Yeah.
And one of the what's called the Bear Mountain ranches, right in front of Bear Mountain, there's a set of ranches there. And the first door he knocked on, the people answered the door and were very private, didn't want to open the door. He introduced himself and told them that he was investigating strange and anomalous activity in the area. And the husband who was at the door said, well, what kind of activity are you talking about? He said, just anything strange, any strange lights and any strange things that you've seen or heard. And the wife said, he must be talking about that white furry creature that's going through our garbage at night. And right away, they caught his ear. He said, yes, you've seen it. And I said, well, it's turned our garbage can over a couple times, and we've got a relative look at it, but we don't want to go out naturally and chase it down. And he got a good laugh from that, but at least it confirmed for him that other people in the area were seeing it. Now, most specifically, what struck Alexander and I in our research is that the ancient Anasazi, who were Native Americans that were in this region, in Nevada, California, New Mexico, parts of Texas, and Colorado, were famous as they're also called the Pueblo people. They built these beautiful stone homes in the cliff outcroppings all throughout these states. And they disappeared from this area 750 to 800 years ago. And they would record very diligently the things they would see in pictographs, beautiful pictograph panels on the rock, cliff walls. And in a canyon that's directly north of the Bradshaw Ranch, there's a pictograph panel there that which clearly depicts a row of Anasazi dancers. And behind those dancers are two figures. You see one very stocky figure with, it appears to have a white body because they used calcite and would mix with animal fat to make the pigment. And it has a head sitting on very stocky shoulders and very robust looking arms. And it's much, much taller than the Anasazi dancers. And the artist that made it probably close to 1,000 years ago left a rectangular bit unpainted on its head where the eyes would be looking through the long fur.
Oh, yeah.
Beside that is a taller figure, which is also very, very spoken of, not only by the Anasazi, but other people in this area, including people that Tom Dongo has interviewed, and also the Hopi on the Hopi reservation. And the Hopi are the descendants of the Anasazi. This creature is even taller than the Bigfoot. It's wearing a robe that's wide at the shoulders, and it has the head of a praying mantis. And it's looming very tall above the Anasazi dancers. And of course, those are now known. In fact, I think it was a couple months ago that the mantis, as they call them, being part of the insectoid of creatures, have actually part of the 4 classes of extraterrestrials that our government is finally admitting actually do exist. And we found 5 pictograph panels depicting the mantis alien here in the canyons north of the Bradshaw Ranch. So it was clearly something that they were seeing 700 to 800 years ago, in addition to a white-furred Bigfoot. And one of my favorite accounts was from a woman who had her only child, her son. She lived here in West Sedona. And during the Iraq War, he had enlisted in the Army and had been in a combat deployment to Iraq. And he came home for a very short visit, and she had to drive him back to the Phoenix airport late one night for a red-eye flight. And so the road at that time, 89A going west of here, where she would eventually get onto I-17, was completely devoid of traffic. Back then, it was just a small 2-lane road. She was leaving town, and she got to a bridge. There's a bridge that goes over a place called Dry Creek. And as her headlights turned and looked down this stretch of road, she saw what she and her son thought was a very large man in a heavy white parka, because it was cold then, jogging down the road on the same side away from them, because she could see it. And then when she got closer, she realized that's fur and this is not human. So she stopped her car, and the two of them had this thing completely illuminated their headlights. It turned, ran across the road, and there's a very, very tall cliff there. It jumped over the berm and went down the cliff and landed on its feet below. And with the windows down, they could hear it hit the bottom, and then they could hear its heavy impact as it ran away. And so that was one of the more amusing sightings. And I think she had actually waited a while to actually report that, because she didn't know who to tell. Moreover, who would believe her if she was to tell them, well, we saw this big white hairy thing when I was driving my son to the airport one night. She was afraid to drive home, because she had to come naturally through the same area.
And a lot of these sightings, many of them, are the consistent patterns in the sightings, times of year, location on the ranch?
That's a really good question. It happens all throughout the year. We recently had some dogman sightings here, which really struck me. The witnesses were horrified, and those sightings were right here in town. Now, in correlation to the weather or moon cycles, Alexander and I have been very keen on observing in the past 13 years anything and everything as far as conditions. When we'd have a really lucky night, we would experience something, or there'd be a very long period of quiet with nothing happening. And we did deduce that when there's a heavy rain, and our monsoon season here can start between mid-July to mid-August. Sometimes it's late and comes between mid-August and mid-September. This year it was
Right.
late, started in mid-August. Usually when the heavy rains come is when the anomalous activity heightens. And I think I'm actually it's more along the lines, I'm quite certain, that what happens when we have the heavy snow melts in the wintertime, the snow melt comes from the Flagstaff area. And of course, naturally, that snow melt's going to go to the lowest point. And we're below the Colorado Plateau where the heavy pine forest is. So naturally, all the snow melt runs our way, but it runs underground. And the volcanic activity in this area has made a lot of small lava tubes. And when they flood, there's an interesting, very geographical oddity to Sedona, which is the red iron oxide that makes the red rocks famous here. Also in these red rocks are a lot of quartz crystal. You can walk along the cliff walls and you can see it sparkling with deposits of quartz crystal and a few other geographical qualities as well that make it possible. And this has been confirmed by a friend of mine who's a retired electrical engineer to generate very massive charges of piezoelectricity. And what more or less, and I'm saying this from a lay perspective because I'm not a scientist or geologist, but with the very cold groundwater running underground through these lava tubes, generating friction against the very high concentrated iron in the rock and the quartz crystal, generates very massive amounts of electrons. And with those electrons, you have positive ions and negative ions. And these clouds of electrons go through the ground and up into the air in the Sedona region. And they carrying either the positive ions or the negative ions, they're attracted to each other. And when they collide, according to now also the scientists at CERN, when these positive and negative ions collide, that's when the magic happens. And they create tears in our reality to other dimensions. So the portals in the Sedona area, which have now become a little bit more famous because of Tom Dongo's book and Linda Bradshaw and her sighting, the portals create these tears which these dimensional beings come through. Some of them are cryptids that are very physical. Others, the most common ones, are these very little, they're like sprites. They're tiny little orbs, which I know are very common in the UK. And the orbs are little sentient, intelligent beings, and they do respond to certain stimulus. And it was kind of cute when we figured this out. We were getting photographs of them, and we were very surprised to see them. And I was showing Tom Dongo over one of our many lunch visits with him. And he waved his hands and he goes, I've got thousands of photographs of orbs, thousands. And I said, it's very curious, isn't it? And he said, well, yeah. He said, don't bother showing those photos to anybody because people try to debunk them. And he said, I don't waste my time with debunkers on orbs anymore. I said, well, what do you have to say about them? Do you have an opinion? He goes, sure. He said, they're intelligent. He said, about as intelligent as a dog. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you can ask them to do things and they'll often do things for you. He said, but you have to be in the right heart space. And he said, the fact that you're seeing them means that you've got a good heart and they're not afraid to show themselves. He said, otherwise they're shy. They won't come around you. And so I said, well, Alexander, I do actually tend to talk out loud to the entities there a lot. We will tell them, please don't be afraid. It's us again. I said, it's more or less a mantra every time we get there is to talk out loud to entities. And he waved his fingers. That's why you're seeing them. He said, tell you what, he said, next time you see them, he said, you have got your camera on, you get the photograph of them. He said, thank them for showing up. Tell them that you love the fact that they showed up and you send them love. He said, ask them to step out of the frame to the next photograph. He said, do it really quickly and then take the next photograph. He said, you'll prove that it's not water molecules and you'll prove that it's not dust. He said, that's what most debunkers like to do. They like to tell you that that's either water molecules or dust in in front of your lens. He said, do that and let me know what happens. So I think it was a week later, we went back out to the ranch and I took a photograph in one of the really highly charged places, which is in between the old adobe and the main house. And it was hundreds of orbs of multiple colors, blues, greens, reds. And I said, thank you so very much. I'm very honored that you would show up for me. And in the highest vibration of love, I give you my gratitude. Do me a quick favor, step out of this frame. And I raised the camera up and I took the photograph. And lo and behold, in that next photograph, not one. It was devoid of any orbs. And we repeated that experiment across the property that night with similar results where they would show up and then they would be gone. And so the orbs are probably the most common of the entities that people encounter there. And I personally think the orbs do come through dimensional portals, not just in the Sedona area, but around the world. And I think it's more or less kind of like insects. You get used to seeing insects in their masses throughout the globe, all in different types in different places, whether it be desert or jungle. I think the orbs, in a way, are just as generously populated in other dimensions as insects are, and that's why when these terrors happen, they come spilling out, and they're curious. They are curious about people. They will hide from some people that are loud and obnoxious that come to the ranch, and those people get angry because they want to see the same thing that others are seeing, but they don't see it. And we have to tell them, well, perhaps it's because you're angry and you're unfriendly. That's why they're not showing themselves to you. Just go with an open heart and be friendly and be nice, be generous, and you're more likely to see them. But
when you talk about Bradshaw Ranch, can you compare Bradshaw Ranch with other paranormal hotspots like Skinwalker Ranch?
Absolutely, absolutely. When I met the team from Brandon Fugel's Skinwalker show, when they were shooting their first season of Beyond Skinwalker, and they came out and they spent a great period of time to shoot their first episode at the Bradshaw Ranch. And I was telling them things that I thought they were going to shake their head and say, you're crazy, you're full of it. We're going to debunk you. But in fact, the team they would look at each other and they would nod and they say, "Yeah, that's old hat to us. We've been experiencing this for 6 years at the Skinwalker Ranch." And up to that point, Alexander and I had never seen the show because we spent all of our free time, instead of watching TV, we were out on the ranch. We were investigating, so we had not seen one episode of the show. And they were surprised. They said, "We've gotten 2 awards for the show. You should go watch a few episodes that are on YouTube. It's pirated all over the place. Watch a few episodes and you'll see how we." And so they, in the course of the time that they were here, virtually all of the properties that were, I shouldn't say properties, all of the anomalies that they were experiencing on the Skinwalker Ranch were happening in much the same way at the Bradshaw Ranch. The only difference being that much of what was being seen and experienced and felt at the Skinwalker Ranch tends to be malevolent. Not all of it, but a blatant majority of it was not friendly, and in some cases would even follow people home. And I'll say it would torture them in their homes with poltergeist-like activity and give them bad dreams, move things in their houses and so on. Most of what's happening at the Bradshaw Ranch is extremely friendly. Some of the entities which Tom and Linda dubbed the Invisibles, those ones were, they can be playful. They can try to get a scare out of you, which could be construed or misconstrued, I think, as being malevolent. But I think they just try to get a reaction out of people sometimes, because we've had a few pranks played on us. And to give you an example, we would do the same thing when we start a stakeout, which is to walk the whole property. And we pay attention to things. We pay attention to which doors on the structures are open or closed. If there's broken glass on the floor, where is the broken glass, so we know what we're hearing if somebody or something steps on it. So paying attention to those little details. And we had walked through the house one night, and there was nobody there. We were the only people on property. And we had just come up to a spot where we had set our folding chairs on a hill that overlooks the house and the old adobe. And all hell broke loose inside the house. It sounded like people dragging large pieces of furniture, breaking glass. Most of the windows in the house were already broken. And so we couldn't tell from outside where that was coming from. So we turned our cameras on quickly and we started jogging toward the door. And we got inside the house. We just started taking photographs in every direction, and there was nothing there. We didn't see anything. And moreover, all that noise and clatter that we heard, that sounded like a sofa being dragged or a big heavy wooden bed frame being dragged. Nothing was moved. Everything was exactly where we had seen it just moments before. So these entities that she dubbed the Invisibles and Tom dubbed the Invisibles, they tend to try to scare people. And in some cases, people will misconstrue that as being a malevolent move, but they're actually quite benevolent. We've had kind of in most cases, a decent interaction with them. On one occasion, and this may have been, we believe, one of the Bigfoot creatures that frequents the property. We took a friend that wanted to see the property, and we did our usual full circle of the property, and we were walking down the east hill, by which time it was dark. Our friend, who had never been there before, was ahead of me on the path. I was in the middle, and Alexander was right behind me. And as Alexander was walking behind me, she felt what felt very explicitly like 2 very big fingers tap her twice on the back of the head. And naturally it startled her. And I heard her yell out, and she said, "Stop, stop. Something just tapped me on the back of the head." I naturally turned around with the camera, and I took 2 quick photographs of her in the immediate area around her. and we caught these large red orbs. They were very large. One was in front of her, and one was right behind her. And I think that when the Bigfoot do dematerialize, and you can't see them, which is probably why they haven't ever gotten the body of one, that they can actually physically manipulate their environment without being seen, unless in this particular case, because the digital cameras see, I think, 12 items that the human eye can't see, or maybe even more than that, I can't remember. But it does have a better, more keen eye than the human eye, and it picked up these orbs. And what she felt were two oversized fingers tap her on the back of the head. And we gave those photographs for the Beyond Skinwalker team to look at. And again, they shook their heads and they were laughing because the same thing had occurred to them on the Skinwalker Ranch. The only thing that was different at that time when they shot that episode in, I think it was 2022, in the winter of 2022, December, is they also were curious about a rumor of an underground base that the government had put in the Sedona area. And it's a very strong rumor. The rumor has been here for a long time. And naturally, with the government seizing in a relatively hostile way 5 properties in the area, that helped to bring those rumors about even more. And there were also very heavily armed paramilitary contractors at the front of some of these properties at the time, including the Bradshaw Ranch. And they asked me if you know anything about this. I said, I do. I said, it's mostly rumors because it's a really hard thing to prove, of course. And they said, well, what can you tell us about the rumors? I said, the rumor is that there's a tunnel, and the tunnel goes under Bradshaw Ranch to several support facilities of this underground base. And they said, well, where do you think it is? I said, well, if it was up to me to decide and think about it, I said it would be a straight line between Secret Mountain, and the Secret Mountain areas to the north in the canyons of the Bradshaw Ranch. And a lot of people have encountered paramilitary contractors at night in areas which are actually public land. And they're told in a very hostile manner, you need to turn around and go back the way you came and don't come back here again. This is government property. And that, of course, is not true. There's public land there. But it's happened countless times to hundreds of people. And if you draw a line from the main support facility, which was rumored to be part of it, which is at the Clarkdale cement plant, straight through the desert in between there and Secret Mountain, that straight line goes right under the Bradshaw Ranch, specifically under the where the old West Town used to stand. So I left that portion of the investigation not knowing what they were going to do, but they brought a outside contracting company that does nothing but shoot ground penetrating radar at certain targets that they're paid to shoot for whatever reason. Sometimes it's a drilling company, sometimes it's a building project. In this particular case, Mr. Fugel had hired them to locate, if there was, a tunnel. And sure enough, they located a 50-foot section of tunnel in a football field area that they scanned. And it was going exactly where I thought it would, in a straight line from where the cement plant was straight to the Secret Canyon area. So that was the other thing that they were very interested in, is the government operation that seemed to be going on in the area. And that's been a whole other side of the investigation for us, is the government side. If there is a negative side, if there is a malevolent force in the area, it's the government. The people who have encountered them have almost exclusively had very negative encounters. We had 2 negative encounters with these particular entities, if you will. And it seems to be the going rate. Nobody ever has a positive encounter with these people. Why exactly they're here, we don't know.
Strange, isn't it? It's just about coming to running out of time, but it's so interesting talking about Bradshaw. I've interviewed Tom before, quite a while ago. Yeah,
the ranch itself, it's an enigmatic place, and again, to go back to your question, it's very, very similar to the Skinwalker Ranch. Very similar. Much of the same activity. Even people seeing portals open and things coming out of the portal. Of course, there's a story that when the NIDS crew was, before Brandon Fugel owned the Skinwalker Ranch, 2 of their men watched a portal open up just above the ground with kind of an orange light coming from it, and they watched the creature crawl out of it. It was a black furry creature. It stood up on 2 legs and then walked into the forest. Of the two men that watched it, the one man was so disturbed he actually had to be relieved of duty that night.
No.
And people have seen portals open up on the Bradshaw Ranch, including Linda Bradshaw. And then there's other properties in the area where people have seen these portals open up. I had a good friend of mine who was very skeptical and didn't believe anything in portals or cryptids in the area. And he was in a canyon north of Bradshaw Ranch called Loy Canyon. He was hiking with a family member, and when he was coming down one of the cliffs, his nephew turned to him and said, "Uncle, what is that? What is that?" And he was pointing across the canyon, and they both saw what looked like a silver or kind of a silverish blue spiral, and it was very fluid the way he described it to me. It was spinning and wavering at the same time, like it was liquid. And they watched it for a matter of seconds, and then it faded out and disappeared. And the nephew, who was from New York, turned to his uncle and said, "Uncle, what was that?" And he said, "I don't know. I think it might be one of these portals that my friend Jeremiah talks about all the time." And so immediately he wanted to tell me about it, but was most curious about that too, Bob, was when he was leaving the canyon, he couldn't get out of his mind, and they got to the mouth of the canyon where they had parked. And this is about 2 miles north of the Bradshaw Ranch. And his nephew again shouted out, "Uncle, what's that? Look up there. There's people up there." On the spine of the cliff that separates the east wall of that canyon to the next canyon over were a bunch of armed men standing on the very top, which is an inaccessible area. It's about 700 foot up off the canyon. And he got his binoculars out so he could look at them, and they looked like U.S. Army soldiers with multicam camouflage M4 carbines, and they were looking down at them. And that made him feel very uneasy. And he said, let's just go. I don't know who they are. Let's get out of here. Let's get you back to your hotel. So he took him back to town, and he realized, okay, I've got my nephew safe. I want to go back there. I want to see what's going on. So by that time it was dark, and he drove back. And as he was driving down the forest road to that area, he came across a roadblock with two what looked like American Army Humvees blocking the road with the hoods together, the bonnets together in kind of an apex. He stopped his car, and what looked like a U.S. Army soldier came out from behind it, waving him off like this. He went to roll his window down to ask him what the heck is going on. And the man shook his head and again waved his hands like this. He didn't want to take the time to talk, to tell him why the road was blocked. So he thought to himself, I'm a patient man. I'm going to turn around and drive down the road, and I'm going to read my book for an hour. After I read my book for an hour, I'm going back and I'm going to find out what's going on. So he did just that. He was reading his book, and an hour goes by. Now it's the wee hours of the morning. He drives back to the spot, and the two Humvees are still there. And this man, the same man, walks out, now recognizing this curious civilian, and is shaking his head even more vigorously and waving him back, telling him to get out. And this time, my friend is angry, but he figures I better not press my luck, because I know that from what Jeremiah says, there's been other people in this area that have guns pointed at them, and I don't want to go that far. So he turned around and left the area, and since then has no longer been skeptical toward portals or toward the government activity in the area. And it's unfortunate that type of activity seems to come with, is part and parcel with the anomalous activity in the area. I cannot say for sure. I can assume just from observation that the anomalous activity and the government activity are here hand in hand. I assume that they're here because they're somehow monitoring or watching or have something to do with the anomalous activity that's so common in the Sedona area. And
I think so too. I do.
Have you got to visit the Sedona area before?
No, I haven't. No, I'd love to sometime.
You would really enjoy. If you do come, you'll have to let me know, because we'll be glad to show you around. It's one of the things that a lot of people will come to Sedona to have a spiritual experience. And I noticed from interviewing a lot of people that come here, whether they be tourists or people who look to move here, they'll say this when I ask them, what brought you here? And they come from all walks of life, different cultures. Sometimes they're from different countries. They'll say, I can't really answer that. The only thing I can say is I felt like I was drawn to come here, or I felt like I had a calling to come here, or I had a dream that told me I had to live in Sedona, Arizona. And I've heard that so many times that I had to take note of it. And it seems to me, and this is my theory, but I think the portals that are in the area actually have a, maybe you could call it a calling card. They call out to people who are sensitive, who are empathic, and they seem to draw people to this area who are very spiritually minded, or empathic or have psychic capabilities or intuitive capabilities. And that also seems to go hand in hand with people that answer that question. That why did you come here? They'll say, I don't know. I was drawn to come here. There's something very special about the Sedona area. And naturally, it's a beautiful area. And the Red Rocks, of course, are postcard like in every direction that you look.
Oh,
There's
God, yeah.
something more to it. There's something here that in our 13 years of investigating, we still can't nail it down. We still can't figure out exactly if we were to define it. And maybe that's the way it'll always be. It might not be something that you can define necessarily. And people will ask me, "Wow, you've been investigating this for 13 years. You must have a good idea of what's going on." And they'll kind of make a face. I say, "No, I don't know." As an investigator, one of the most important phrases that you can tell other people is to just be honest and say, "I don't know," because a lot of the things that you experience, you can confabulate what you believe it is. You can make a confabulatory statement of what you think you have observed, but then you might mislead others who are also coming with an open heart and open mind to make up their own minds. And if you do that, you're not a good investigator, whether new at it or professional. It's best to let people make up their own minds on what they observe, and also to encourage more eyes to go out and look. And I think one of the problems with the younger generations now is they're all doing this. They have free time, they're scrolling on their phones, and you have to pry their phones away from them. And a lot of them are people that will come up and say, "Wow, I really wish I could see the things that you've seen in the past 13 years. I'm like, "Well, you can, but you have to turn off the phone, put it away, and you have to go out there and look."
Exactly.
You've got to get your phone.
We've just about run out of time now, but send my regards to Alexandra. Unfortunately, she couldn't make tonight's show, but I'm sure when you're ready to come back on again, I'm quite willing to interview you both next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bob. It's been an honor.
Are you doing any conferences this year? Are you talking anywhere or?
As of right now, not that I know of. We're still doing. We're doing another investigation. It's a collaborative investigation with some other people, and it's taking up all of our free time. So the few times that we've been asked to do a few things, I regrettably had to say no because it landed on some of the days that we were working with these other investigators, and it's taken up a great deal of our time. And it's in relation to what we were talking about. And it's been a lot of free time. It's been a lot of taken up by the investigation, and a lot of stress because they've got a deadline. So I've been trying to work with them to bring the information and material to them for their deadline. And they've come up as a team. We've come up with a lot of really good evidence for what's going on in the area. And I'm really anxious to see what the collaborative effort comes up with. Because we're being very, we were all asked not to discuss things. So the non-disclosure agreement, if you will, even between a lot of the other investigators, is probably going to end up being a good idea because we're not polluting each other with thoughts and ideas of what we're
exactly.
And they can put it all on the table and sort out what they've got on the table later and see what corroborates what. And that's taken up a lot of our time. So I've had to turn down quite a few speaking engagements because of that. But after that's over, I hope to get back into being able to talk about the phenomena. Because it's really been fun. I've been the best part of it is to make friends.
Well, what you have to do is give me some dates, end of the year sometime or whenever, when you're available to come back on again.
It'd be my pleasure.
Yeah, and I'll book you in.
That would be great. It'd be my pleasure, Bob. I'm so grateful. Thank you so very much.
Hey, thank you for coming on the show.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, you've been a great guest. I've been totally enjoyed it. I'll send you the recording of the show so you can put it wherever you want.
Thank you.
But cheers and enjoy rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
It's night time here now. Mate, it's only 8 o'clock at night, so
oh my gosh, yeah.
It's still not late. Actually, but thank you again.
You're very welcome.
We'll get Alexandra on next time. No problem about that.
Thank you so much.